After the tumult that had come before, the rumble of military lorries, the scramble of people to clear the vicinity where they were headed, the pushing and shoving of those crowding the tram, any normal citizen might have breathed a sigh of relief upon turning into this calm, deserted street. Instead, I felt a keen sense of exposure. There were no more throngs to conceal myself within, no more ordinary Dubliners bustling about with which to blend. I feared my drab garb, lowered head and slumped shoulders wouldn't be enough to project the image that I was but another weary soul trudging home after a long day. Particularly when anyone peering out of the tall shutterless windows of the Georgian brick townhouses on this street, south-east of the city centre, would find only me to scrutinise. There was safety and anonymity in numbers, a fact I'd learned well during the war. In my work as a British intelligence agent, slipping back and forth from the neutral Netherlands across the border strung with electrified barbed wire into Belgium, I'd come to intimately understand how one was at more personal risk from the German occupiers in wide open spaces and quiet narrow alleys than the lively town square. Here, too, the Irish rebels seem to have learned this lesson. Their murder gangs most often struck in crowds, assassinating their targets in well-populated areas where they could then blend back into the populace as they made their escapes. Even the members of their volunteer army used the masses to cover some of their activities, as seemed to be the case that afternoon when they'd raided a British garrison in the city for weapons. Hence the lorries filled with troops rushing northward, albeit much too late. I'd listened to a pair of men discussing the incident on the tram, whether they were actual members of the brigade who had plundered King's Inn for guns and ammunition, or simply part of the crowd that had cheered them on afterward, I didn't know, but they were definitely on the side of the Republicans, as were many of the people riding the tramcar, if their nods and remarks of approval were anything to judge by. Others, like me, kept their faces turned away and their thoughts to themselves, though I was careful not to view their neutral expressions as indications of disapproval rather than greater circumspection. After all, at least some of them must have been aware that enemy informants could be standing in their midst, listening to everything they said. There was always someone willing to snitch on their neighbours for a few measly quid. But on this quiet street, there was no lilting refrain of Irish brogue to accompany me, no clatter of carts or rattle of bicycle chains or ringing bells from passing trams as in the busier thoroughfares. And this being a residential street, there was no foot traffic from those drawn to the theatres, pubs and restaurants in the evening, only the clack of my footfalls ringing over loud in my ears and a snatch of birdsong to punctuate it. I looked up as a pair of buntings flew overhead, making their way toward the trees ringing Fitzwilliam Square. My intelligence training asserted itself, and I strained to hear any telltale signs that I was being followed while continuing to trudge forward, determined not to give myself away. But my heart was pounding too loudly in my ears. I was out of practice, and Dublin was new territory for me. Territory where, as a prominent, well-to-do British citizen, I should have been safe. But at the moment the city was a snake pit, one teeming with revolutionaries and the forces the British government had sent to squash them. I wasn't yet certain from which I was most in danger, but there was a risk from both. Approaching the corner with a narrow alley, I resorted to an old trick. Lowering my worn bag to the pavement, I bent down on one knee, ostensibly to tie a shoelace which had come undone. Under the cover of this gesture, I searched the length of the street in front and behind me for anything suspicious. However, it was empty, save for a gentleman some 200 yards in front of me, already turning the corner into the square.